Okay, well, welcome to the May edition of the Kentucky Monthly Climate Perspective on Drought and Hydrological Conditions. Welcome, everyone. All right, gonna move this out of the way. Just some general information to get started. This webinar series is presented by the Kentucky Climate Center at WKU in partnership with the National Integrated Drought Information System and in coordination with the Midwest Drought Early Warning System. Production and delivery of this webinar reflects the contributions of many partners committed to serving the needs of the Commonwealth of Kentucky and its people. The next regularly scheduled webinar will be on June 5th, and that is at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing. The webinar is also live streaming on the Kentucky Climate Center YouTube channel. A webinar archive is available on the Kentucky Climate Center YouTube channel. All right. Well, without further ado, let me having trouble getting my little screen out of the way here. Let me see this. All right. Whoops. Let's see. Are you guys seeing the screen?
Yeah, we see the webcam from Lewis County.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna let a few folks in. It's not, I'm gonna try this one more time. Things look a little odd on my end. Okay, that looks better, I think. All right. Well, as normal, we'll look at some recent conditions, impacts, outlooks, a summary, and then take questions and discussion at the end. So these are just a few images from across the state with our Mesnet web cameras. There's Wayne County from April 3rd with a nice gust front moving in there. And lower picture is Shelby County on April 24th, a little later in the month, but we still had some good storms around then and some showers. So just jumping in here, let's get the temperatures out of the way. It was a lot like March. It was a warm month. It turned out it was over 3 degrees, 3.3 degrees above average. We averaged 58.9 degrees, which tied us for the 15th warmest out of the 130 years. So a relatively warm month, especially across the southern half of the state. And if you look at break that down by climate divisions, roughly uh, pretty much the whole state was close to, well, the western half was over 3 degrees above. The bluegrass area was 2.6 degrees, but pretty much the whole state was fairly warm for the month. And again, a lot like March. If we look at March and April together, again, the spring so far is 3.6 degrees above average, which ties us for the ninth warmest on record. We have, and again, if you break that down by climate division, the western half of the state was 4.1 degrees above normal, and the eastern half was 3.1 degrees above. And if you break that down by the maximum and minimum temperatures, the maximums were quite warm, 3, 4, or 4 degrees above normal, whereas the nighttime lows were 2 to 3 degrees above, or 1 to 3 degrees above. But fairly warm winter, and again, spring, and that puts us in the top 10, or ties us for the ninth warmest out of the 130 years on record. So a fairly warm spring to start. Now, turning to precipitation, which is what's going to be the most memorable about this month. If we look at the last week, fairly widespread rains across the state. 1, 2 inches across, especially the bluegrass region. But the whole state's received some rain over the last week, and that continues today. If you look at the last 2 weeks, more of the same, pretty widespread, nice coverage across the state, and a little heavier rains across the east. Some areas that missed some of the rains early in the month. But then if we go back 30 days, then we capture the full all the rains and the flooding that we had, and you see the outline there. A big, pretty wide swath that received over 10 inches for the month, and most of it those April 2nd through the 6th. And you see a few of the counties out west, 15, 14.6, 15, over 17 inches of rainfall for the month. And that's just 1 month, which is amazing numbers across the state. And but you will note that there are a couple of sites across southeastern Kentucky that missed out on those, and so you see one site just under 3, just over 3. So a couple of stations that missed out on that, but just a small part of the state. And if we go back 2 months again, that the April 2nd through 6th rains really dominate the map here, but you start to see at least one station over 20 inches for the last 2 months. But then you go again to southeast and you're talking just over 5 inches. So pretty wide diversity, wide range there across the state. And then if we go back a full 3 months, you see that, yeah, a lot of the state has over 20 inches for the 3 months, except for eastern, northeastern, southeastern Kentucky, which is just under 10. Now, if we look at the monthly summaries, we see that again in April, you had a fairly wide swath from Lexington, Louisville, stretching down, actually almost to Little Rock, down through Memphis and across Arkansas, where you had a pretty wide swath over 10 inches. The radar indicated over 12 inches and even over 15 inches in some spots. And if you look at the percent below compared to normal, you see a pretty wide area of the state got over 200% of normal for the month. Only a very few fringe areas across the borders received less than the normal for the month. We'll talk about that a little more. But if we go back to the beginning of the year, wow, again, you see this pretty large area, over 30 inches for the year. Just unbelievable totals. And that same swath, over 175% of normal already. And I always say the Ohio River means something, and sure enough, you go north of the Ohio River and it drops off pretty quickly. But again, well, the whole state is above average for the year. And but again, that Appalachia, southern, south central is just above normal, whereas the rest of the state's far above normal compared to average. Now, if we just focus on March and April, so far this spring, again, it's dominated by those April 2nd to April 6th rains. And but you do see for spring so far, we have Appalachia, or at least Pike counties and the counties surrounding Pike, below normal. In fact, quite a bit below normal so far for the spring. And that's due to particularly in March, pretty dry March, average across the state, but far western, far eastern Kentucky were below average. Now, if we look at the numbers, we averaged just over 9.5 inches of rainfall across the state for April. That puts us almost 5.5 inches above normal, which is 233% of average. Now, if we break it down by climate division, we averaged over 11 inches, 11.5 inches across the western half of the state. And this is for April. These are April numbers. 11.6 across the far western, 11.74 for central portions of the state, and But then it drops off pretty quickly as we move east. Just under 10 inches for the bluegrass, and then eastern Kentucky 6 inches, just over 6 inches uh, for April. And that puts even eastern Kentucky 160% above average, but the rest of the state well over 250% of average. That ranks, you would think that would rank this April as the wettest ever, but it puts us at second wettest. And that's second to 2011, which averaged 12 inches across the state. So we were still 2.5 inches from that. I wasn't here then, but I just couldn't imagine that much rain. So we ranked second to 2011. And if we look at the spring, we averaged 13.8 inches, which puts us not quite 4.5, almost 4.5 inches above the mean, which means so far this is the eighth wettest spring on record, if you average March and April together. Now, this is interesting if you go back to January. Kentucky has averaged 26.4 inches across the state. That puts us at over 10 inches above the mean, and that makes 2025 the wettest on the record so far. And we're beating second place by 3/4 of an inch, 0.75 inches. 1939 is number 2, and 2011 is number 3, if looking at the January through April numbers. So we'll probably put a press release about this out early next week. That's pretty newsworthy that so far this year, 2025 is the wettest year on record. And that's saying a lot when you look at the company we have there at the top. And again, that's primarily due to the February and the April floods, but that's quite a bit of rainfall. Now, a little focus on the flooding, just a couple of numbers coming out of that. There were 7 confirmed flood fatalities, which I think is less than what we saw in February. I think the February numbers were quite high. I'll have to go back and look at the February numbers, but from these April rains, it's 7 confirmed fatalities and 90 plus water rescues. And I should say these data are from the Louisville Weather Service office. I know Paducah had some stuff up, and I couldn't find it this morning, but these numbers are from the Louisville office, so there may be more out there that I don't know about. But 52,000 were without power, 1,100 without water, 3,000 under a boil advisory, 5 sewer systems down. There were over 500 roads closed, including portions of I-65, I-165, 169, 69, 71. So a lot of the major interstates had closures at some point. The Pennyrile, the Gene Snyder around Louisville. I know in Bullitt County, the only road connecting the southern and northern parts of the county was I-65, and that created a lot of traffic issues. There were 13 mudslides, 1 rock slide, 200 plus evacuations, mandatory evacuations in Carroll and Pendleton counties. 40 plus emergency shelters were open. Several state parks and hotels served as shelters. I know Frankfort they had their second highest flood crest in Frankfort, which is again saying a lot given the flood history they have there. The mayor issued a mandatory curfew April 6th and 7th during the peak of the flooding. The Buffalo Trace Distillery closed for several days, and even the water treatment plant shut down there for a couple of days. And so significant impacts across the state over a wide swath of the state. On the right are pictures from Frankfort, picture of Louisville there along the Belvedere. And here are some maps just showing the impact, the numbers associated with that flooding from the Mesonet. You see again a large part of the state got at least 5 inches over those 5 days, and a pretty large swath received over 10 inches, and then the maximum 15 inches in out far western Kentucky. So just tremendous amount of rainfall. And there at the bottom is kind of a satellite, a radar mosaic, and you see the wide swath of 10 plus inches going from south, roughly Hot Springs, Arkansas, all the way up through towards Lexington and Louisville. So it wasn't just Kentucky. It was a pretty wide swath that received pretty heavy rain amounts. And just some records. We did record a number of daily records, a couple of interesting ones. A new 4-day record for Bowling Green, over 10 inches. The previous record was just over 9.5. And then over 2 inches of rain fell 3 consecutive days in a row at both Louisville and Bowling Green. And that's never happened before in Louisville, and it's only happened one other time in 1937 in Bowling Green. So some pretty, again, some pretty rare records being set there. And then some flood crest. The Kentucky River at Camp Nelson did set a new record peak there, beating the old record by a foot, set in 2010. And then we had several locations. The Kentucky River in Frankfort set its second all-time high. And then we had the Kentucky River at High Bridge, Lockport, set their third highest rank, as was the Green River in Rochester. To say the Green River at Mammoth Cave also came in at either second or third highest that they've recorded. And then some additional pictures there on the right. These are again from the Weather Service offices in Louisville. A picture of the Ohio River at Tell City. You can see the water there, and then Kentucky River at Lockport. You see pretty major flooding there. And then just a couple of other tidbits from around the state. For the Ohio River, both Louisville and Owensboro measured their highest crest since March 1997. This wasn't a major flood for them, but in the case of Louisville, it did force the cancellation of Thunder over Louisville, which probably led to a revenue loss of over $10 million. First time Thunder's been canceled due to weather in its history. The Barren River Lake reached its all-time record high level of 585 elevation there, and beating the old record in 1989. Like I said, the Kentucky River reached its second highest all-time in Frankfort, but it did set a record at Camp Nelson. And then on the Green River, several locations all achieved their top 5 crests, both at Paradise, Rochester Dam, Woodbury. All were in the top 5. And just some pictures from some of our mesonet cameras. These none of these cameras overlook the river, but various nearby rivers rose far above their normal levels and flooded nearby fields, and that's what you see here in these mesonet images. This is from Lewis County. Again, a field that's normally farmed, but quite a bit of flooding there. April 3rd. This is Butler County, April 4th. Again, typically these are this is farmland, and a lot of damage to crops, winter wheat, especially across the state, as we'll see. And then this is Butler County, April 4th. You see a bit of a shoreline there, so to speak, and then April 7th, it's completely covered. So that's the same picture just a few days later as the water continued to rise. That's probably the highest we'll ever see it. At least we hope so. And then I've been asked several times, well, is this a 1 in 20-year event, a 1 in 50-year event? How does this flood rate? And the National Water Center put out this map of the flooding, and they rate portions of this flood as a 1 in 500 year, 1 to 200 to 500 year event, maybe even more, across some sections of, say, Western Kentucky. Overall, I would probably call it a 1 in 33 year event. If I had to put a number on it, maybe 1 in 50 year event. But I think these numbers here in this map are a little high, but compared to some of the historical numbers I've seen. But Chip, I'll be anxious to discuss this at the end with you, your thoughts on how this would rate. But But nevertheless, it was a pretty significant event. And in addition to the flooding, we did have some storms around. As is typical this time of year, these are a couple of our snapshots from our photos from our Mesnet sites. This is from Zion County, or Todd County. This is a Zion site at Todd County. Um, Looking west, nice rain shaft there, pretty dramatic. This is a really nice gust front that came in at the farm site here in Warren County, Bowling Green, and no severe weather with this particular gust front, but it was pretty dramatic as it rolled in. And then this is Owen County, April 10th. Some nice showers off in the background there. So we did have some tornadoes around. This is again from the Louisville office. They had a series of storms that came through early in the flooding period, April 2nd, April 3rd, and pretty dramatic one actually, EF3 that hit eastern Jefferson County. You see in the J-Town area, you see the photo of the damage there. It hit a business, I believe, yeah, and pretty significant damage. Not a terribly long path, but almost 10 miles, 9.5 mile path. And NEF2, not terribly far away across the border in Indiana. Um, you see the damage from that one here. And a series of EF1s, EF2s associated with those storms. Quite a few warnings, but fortunately not too many tornadoes came out of those. Well, that's what we've had last month. Let's turn our attention to drought across the state. And of course, we have no drought in Kentucky, but some areas to our east and west are still dealing with some dry conditions. This is the current state of the map. You see along the eastern seaboard, there's some dryness, especially across, say, Florida. And then if you go out to the plains, there's some moderate drought across some areas, but that's improving. And you have to go pretty far to the southwest before you start running into severe or extreme drought, unfortunately. And of course, again, in Kentucky, we don't see any drought at the moment. And if we look over the last month, again, the whole last month has been quite wet here in Kentucky, but you see nationally quite a bit of improvement across our region, our broader region, across Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, even out to Oklahoma, up in the Minnesota and the plains. So quite a bit of improvement. The lone exception to that is Florida, and that's due to strengthening Bermuda High out over the Atlantic, driving a lot of east air into Florida, keeping it relatively dry. If we look at soil moisture, it's a lot like we would expect. Pretty wet conditions over Kentucky, and fortunately, drying soils the last few weeks, as we'll see, but pretty wet overall over almost all of Kentucky. If we look at the 20-day average of stream flows, we see probably near records or very high numbers across most streams. The lone exception again being out in Pike County in far eastern Kentucky. If we look at the last 7-day average, things are starting to dry out, get back to more normal conditions, and we start to see a few more areas of relatively dry stream flows across eastern, southeastern Kentucky, where they've received, of course, the least amount of rainfall. Now turning to agricultural impacts, this is a photo from one of our mesonet stations out in Breathitt County. This is from April 9th, a good time to burn the fields if you're going to do that. Pretty wet conditions, and so they burned the field there in front of the mesonet site. Fortunately, the mesonet site didn't have any damage, and that's the way to do it. Wait till after a heavy rainfall, and then if you can get it to burn, it's time to do it. Checking soil moisture conditions across the state, I was surprised by these, but most of the sites are pretty consistent. They show quite a bit of drying over the last few weeks. We had those heavy rains, of course, early April, And then depending on where you lived, you had at least a few weeks of fairly average to below average conditions for rainfall, and that allowed the topsoil to dry out some. And Hart County, you see quite a bit of drying following those heavy rains early in the month. And you see the lower depths at 20 inches, 40 inches are remaining pretty saturated, but you get up to the top 10 inches and it's starting to dry out pretty well. We're getting a lot more sun, a lot more evaporation. The grass is starting to grow, vegetation is starting to really take off, and that's drying out those upper layers. And that's what we're seeing in the data. If we look at ag conditions, the wheat crop, the winter wheat crop really took a hit with the rains in April, and you see that in the Kentucky wheat condition map. Pretty poor conditions compared to average in the last year. If you look at the current numbers, there's been some rebound the last few weeks, but 58% rated as good or excellent. Still pretty low numbers. Hopefully those numbers will continue to go back up as things dry out. Kentucky pastures, they're okay, but still pretty wet in some areas. And if we look at the progress of planting so far, well, the wet conditions have definitely slowed things down. Everything's a bit behind compared to last year and compared to the 5-year average. Corn's right around 25%. Normally, that's around 38%. So quite a bit behind. Same with soybeans isn't too bad, but tobacco planted is about 10% behind. So we're running a little behind or a lot behind depending on the crop. And so looking ahead, we are expecting, this is the 7-day QPF. We are expecting some up to maybe an inch and a half of rain across Kentucky, but this is primarily focused across the central and the eastern half of the state, which is, as we'll see, is the one area of the state that's starting to dry out. So this is actually not a terrible forecast for the eastern half of the state. Now, some areas there in central Kentucky, then maybe that's a little much. But as we'll see, after this first 7 days, things start to dry out again. So, but this is expected QPF for the next week. If we look at U.S. hazards over the next week, nothing forecast for Kentucky, and not a whole lot out there across the country. A few areas of heavy rain expected in the next few days, but nothing for us, nothing for our region. You do see some flooding occurring along the Mississippi, and again, that's a result of our record rainfall for April. If we look out 6 to 10 days, we see above average temperatures expected, but below normal precip. So after this first week, beyond that, things look to dry out quite a bit. So below normal precip for the 6 to 10 day outlook. And then as we go out to 8 to 14 days, it looks like a similar pattern. Dry conditions, below normal conditions for precip, above normal rain temperatures. So it should remain warm and dry for at least the mid part of May. And then May as a whole, in general, it looks like warm conditions with equal to below normal chances for precip, with the higher precip chances actually staying out in the more of the drought areas. So a pretty good forecast for a lot of the country. And then if we look at the next 3 months, including May, above normal temperatures, equal chances for precip, and again, not a bad forecast for us. And looking at the long range outlooks for the next year, pretty much above normal temperatures for us. We're in neutral conditions, so somewhat unpredictable, but above normal temperatures for us. Again, part of this is just based on climatology. Things are warming, so that's kind of built into this. But there are some other things going on which would give us some above normal temperatures. So Now looking at precip, we see equal chances for precip this spring through the summer and into the fall. And it's not until next spring again that they have above normal precip for us. That's probably based on expecting another La Nina to develop by this time late next winter. But as we'll see, a lot of uncertainty associated with that. And here's the outlook, the monthly outlooks for INSO and neutral conditions currently, and then it becomes widely uncertain after midsummer. So it could be neutral, could be La Nina, less likely El Nino, but we'll just have to wait and see. But fairly unpredictable. Here are the models, and you see they're all over the place. So, but most of them cluster around neutral going forward. And then the monthly drought outlook, again, nothing in our area, some improvement in the regions closest to us that are dealing with drought, some drought along the mid-Atlantic, but you have to go pretty far out there, out to the plains before you get to persistent drought. And not much change in the seasonal outlook as we go forward. Just well, I would say improvement along the eastern seaboard in the south, but no drought expected near us. And same with the fire outlook, nothing in Kentucky, and you have to go pretty far out into the plains before you have a fire risk. And I think a lot of that is, some of that at least, is due to wet spring in some areas, more potential for fire due to the rain they're getting now, but not much near us. So in summary, this month was the second wettest on record this April, and near record monthly rainfall totals, of course, were driven largely by the historic flooding April 2nd through the 6th. And I would say it was likely a 1 in 33-year event, maybe a 1 in 50-year event. Of course, that will vary depending upon where you live. But combining this event with the February flooding event, and that puts 2025 as the wettest year on record so far, out of the 130-year record. So that is saying something. And the wettest previous was 2011. A warm start to spring. We're tied for ninth warmest spring so far on record, which again, it's you don't really think of it. The rainfalls dominated the news, and so this is kind of kind of snuck in on us. Didn't realize it was quite this warm. So the good news, there's no drought on the horizon. Soil is plenty moist, no fire danger. Of course, the bad news is that the wet conditions persist, and that's had a negative impact on the winter wheat and has delayed planting. The May outlook is for warm temperatures and average to maybe below average rainfall going forward. So I expect that we'll start drying out. And the long-term forecast is generally normal rainfall and above normal temperatures for the remainder of the spring and summer. So now with the neutral conditions, it's a little more unpredictable. So we'll see. I think normally if things are a little more predictable than maybe they are right now, but so far so good. Nice period to dry out, hopefully in the next month. So with that, I'll stop and take questions. Again, whoops, I forgot to update this, but the next webinar is June 5th, and same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central. And feel free to contact me or Matt Dixon at UFK or Chip at Division of Water if you have any questions. And again, feel free to check out our our archive on YouTube. So thank you again for joining us. And I'll go ahead and stop and we can take questions.
Yeah, Jerry, I'm not a huge fan of the whole 1 in 10 years, 100-year stuff. But I mean, if you look at it, we've had major flooding events pretty much every year for the past few years, and um, but looking at just the huge statewide events, I mean, I think this is similar to 2010 and 97. So I don't even know if I'd call it a one in 10, 1 in 15 year event. Unfortunately, the way we get more and more precipitation events, big events.
Well, yeah, and I agree. I'm glad you said that because I was surprised at how high the numbers were that came out of the water center. Um, those numbers surprised me a bit. It looked a little high. And just reading your text there in the chat about soil moisture is lower than it was, but still plenty of moisture there. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Um, yeah, I
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
those numbers are still in the 25 percent range there. I mean, so they're still well above wilting point. That's probably more normal for what you want to see this time of year when it hasn't rained. When it starts getting down to like below 20 and closer to like 15%, that's when they start really drying out. So
Mm. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah, driving around, you still see a lot of areas where you can see the mud left behind the fields. You can see where it flooded, and yeah, I wouldn't want to drive a tractor in some of those areas yet. Any other questions, comments? I guess I was surprised to see this was the wettest year on record so far, but I hadn't heard that. But of course, we hadn't crunched the numbers until today. But um, it makes sense when you combine the February flooding with this one, and uh, March was about average, and so it can add up.
Yeah,
How's
Jerry,
everybody?
Shane here. Just to back up what you've been mentioning about how wet it's been. For Bowling Green, for the Airport ASOS, this is the wettest April all time, 11.58 inches. That beat out 1912 there. For Lexington and Frankfort, this was the third wettest April ever for both cities. For Paducah, it's number 5 all time, 9.47 inches. And for Louisville, also number 5 all time, 9.42 inches.
Yeah, that's good. That's some big numbers. Anybody else? Chip, I didn't talk a lot about river levels, but one question that's come up before is the Mississippi, and we did see that there's some flooding, along the Mississippi. Have you heard of any transportation issues, or I didn't hear anything this time.
no, I haven't. I do know that barge traffic was interrupted on the Ohio briefly, but nothing. I don't think it was anything significant.
I know last year there was a lot of discussion about the water levels being too low, so maybe that problem's alleviated for a while. I did have some email back and forth with Jay Nelson, who's a division director there in the Department of Financial Resources, and he was telling me that of the 200 or so federally funded dams that he is in charge of, he had 197 of those issue alerts during the flooding event. So 197 out of the 200, and they only had one breach, but pretty severe damage to some others. So I guess good news that the only one breached, but we'll see how costly that becomes. But Well, that's a good question. In the chat, do weather folks index conditions against the cost of road drainage repair? Wow, I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question. I know they've started rating winners based on severity.
Mhm.
And they do that so they can approximate, in the future how much money is set aside based on
Mhm.
forecast and that. But I've not heard that talked about as far as uh, I'm sure that there'll be a number come out of this, just like the Eastern Kentucky flooding a few years back. But
Mhm. Well, what about a place like Asheville, for example? When I looked at they built 10,000 new hotel rooms in this century. And between that and the brewery and a whole bunch of other hardscape, they cut down about 9.9%. They covered about 9.9% of Buncombe County in this century alone, up through last year anyway. Um, so I was wondering how much of that flooding in Asheville, but it could be here too, had to do with human factors of having water sheeting into rivers so much faster than before. And I'm sure in Asheville it had some effect, but I don't know who calculates stuff like that or whether it is calculated.
I'll say when you get 20 inches of rain in a couple of days span like they did in Asheville, I don't think it matters anymore. I mean, it might have had a small effect, but with how much water came down, it was going to run off no matter what you had. And plus,
Mhm.
a lot of that water came from upstream, up in the mountains. So there
Right.
wasn't. So it was just that when you have that much rain, the soil becomes saturated, and then it's just pure runoff,
So it's as if it were hardscape almost.
pretty much.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Chip. Yeah, but I know that below this, or when I say I know, I've been told by a reliable source that the water was running off the hill where the Sierra Nevada Brewery is so fast at the French Broad River was running backward at that point.
mm,
That cross current was so powerful, it was backing the river up. So maybe, I don't know if that would change your answer or not, but I'm very interested in that sort of thing.
mm.
I guess what I'm saying is that at least in Lexington, I don't see public officials thinking about that at all. The impact of that kind of hardscape versus hardwood absorption sort of problem or issue. We don't have any rivers going through the middle of town, of course, but just wondered about we get very self-satisfied about, well, yeah, we've got some flooding, but it's not that bad kind of thing.
Yeah, I've heard of issues like that in Texas because, well, the topography is so different, and here there's, well, at least in the Houston area, you hear about that a lot. They'll put in a subdivision and it'll change the hydrology of the
Mm-hmm.
region. And here I've not heard that so much. Chip, I'm speaking out of my area for sure, but I don't know with the karst that we have with the topography, maybe it's a lot less of an issue here. Uh, I do wonder if it has some impact on the margins, like say the Camp Nelson numbers, is it set a record there, but is it really a record, or did the river change enough that there's other things going on that causes that to fluctuate over time?
Yeah, it's that's something that's beyond what I know. But I mean, yeah, I mean things are obviously changing, so it can have an impact. But as for flooding in Lexington, I know they did do a lot of work after. I think it was, I want to say it was 2006. It was like September, October. There was a big event. It was 6 inches, and it was at nighttime, and there was a lot of the localized flash flooding, which that's the stuff that you really do have to, that really is impacted by the hardscape, is
Mhm.
these quick flash flooding events, not so much the huge massive river events.
Oh, I see.
And
Okay.
so they did have that, and they did do a lot of work, especially over by UK. They installed a lot more drainage area or larger pipes, and they also created some bigger basins to help kind of catch and hold that water and hold it back. So over there by the football stadium, the UK Arboretum and stuff, they did a lot of work there, and even incorporated some of that into the Arboretum. But that's kind of how, if you look at a lot of neighborhoods across central Kentucky, I'm sure it's across the country, they have uh, green spaces that are basin areas that basically
Mhm.
holding back that runoff. I know my neighborhood has several of them, and
Mhm.
so it holds back that water for a little bit, lets some of it soak into the ground, and the rest of it slowly goes out. You kind of simulate more of what you would expect if it was natural. And it's not foolproof, but it does help.
Mhm.
That's a good point, Chip. And I know here in Bowling Green, they've done some of the same things. Some of the more flood-prone areas, they've done a lot of work to try to prevent that. And just one tidbit here in Bowling Green, we have the Lost River Cave that runs through Bowling Green, and you can take a tour of, float on the river under in the cave, and that's been closed since February due to the high water levels. So some of the streams are still pretty high.
Yeah, the karst does that. It slows everything down. Only so much water can go through those underground conduits. So it that's why you see stream flows stay elevated um, longer, and why you have less uh, basically a lower stream flow variability index in the karst areas. Um, and if before this rain came in, if you looked at the stream flow map, you're starting to see yellow dots even out in kind of western and central Kentucky, like in the western coal fields, where they hadn't had rain in a couple weeks, and the streams are getting kind of low. But in that western Mississippian area there, that goes from Princeton along the Tennessee border and then curls up through Bowling Green up towards Hardin County, all the streams are still running high, and the same thing in central Kentucky. And
That's a
and
great point. Yeah.
and in Bowling Green, you have the problem where you have flooding from the water flooding up through the sinkholes.
Right.
So you have lakes start forming.
Yep. Yep. Interesting hydrology.
Yep.
Well, I ran out of time, but I did want to see how we were doing with regards to severe weather this spring compared to normal. I think we had a lot of warnings, but I don't think we had all that many. My guess is we're somewhat average, maybe slightly above in western portions of the state, but I'll try and find that out for next time. Uh, it seems like a fairly average spring, but I didn't want to find those numbers. I couldn't find the numbers. They're buried somewhere in the Iowa Mesnet web pages, but I should have them by next time. Any other questions, comments? Chip, did I miss anything? Anything to add?
Nope. Other than there's a whole bunch of water heading up towards Lexington right now.
I was in Lexington yesterday, and I drove in Tuesday evening and drove in right when the thunderstorm was hitting. So that was a good one.
That's
Plenty of
what's
lightning.
lined up from Woodford County down to Tompkinsville. There's just all the storms are all firing up and running along the same line, training.
And that reminds me, I didn't want to point out again that the eastern, southeastern portions of the state are pretty dry, but they're forecast to get enough rain over the next few days to maybe alleviate some of that. So we'll
Hmm.
see. If we had to point to one area of the state that's drying out, it would be them.
Yeah, they've been just below average, but they had a lot of rain in January and February.
Mm. That's true. That's right. All right. Anything else? Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all, and hopefully you'll be able to join us next month on June 5th. So
Love it.
thank you all.
Thank you.